All right, my friends, when you hear that music, that means it's time for the Soulful Psalms segment of Beacon of Truth. This is the part of the show where we take part of the Psalms from the wisdom literature of the Old Testament that we hear in every single Mass, and we connect that Psalm to your everyday lived experience. And the best part is the Soulful Psalms are now its own podcast. So if you go to EWTN's website and go to Podcast Central, you can download and listen to this Soulful Psalm segment as its own podcast, or on the EWTN app, as I do, or you can go to your favorite podcast platform like iTunes and Spotify and SoundCloud, and again, download and listen to these Soulful Psalms every day as its own podcast. And I'm using the revised Grail Psalms. These are Psalms that have been approved for use in the Mass, and it was compiled by the Benedictine monks of Conception Abbey. And today, you think by now that we would have at least dove into all of the Psalms, at least started our look at all the Psalms. Well, today, we're going to look at a Psalm we haven't looked at before, I haven't started before. Psalm 137. Now, this is not an imprecatory psalm like Psalms 58, 83, and Psalm 109 that we're exploring here on this show, but that are not included in the breviary because they're called quote unquote cursing psalms. I mean, it doesn't use bad language or anything like that, but the language is strong in its condemnation of people, of certain enemies of Israel, that they were not included as part of the revised breviary in the early 70s when the breviary was revised, the Liturgy of the Hours. And this is one of those psalms that where part of it is cut out because of the imprecatory nature of the psalm. But we're not going to get to that part today. Today we're going to look at, again, Psalm 137, book 5 of the Psalms. This doesn't have a prescript or a superscript. It just dives right into the Psalms. We don't know who the psalmist is for this one, but we know for a fact it was written during a time of the Babylonian exile, when the people of Israel were brought into captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And so this psalm starts, Psalm 137, verse 1. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept, remembering Zion. On the poplars that grew there, we hung up our harps. So think about this. The peoples are in exile. They're out of their homeland. They're sitting by the rivers in this foreign land, the land of their enemies in Babylon, and they're sitting there weeping. They're sitting there weeping, remembering their homeland, remembering what their life was like before, remember they were free to openly worship God. And they're remembering the former times, remembering the past with a sense of sadness in their hearts. On the poplars that grew there, we hung up our harps, right? Because they used to sing. They used to play different instruments like the sheminith, was called the eighth chord, or the harp, or the flute, or kind of like a lyre, and other type of instrumentation that we see in the prescripts or superscripts of some of the psalm where it gives us the instrumentation. But they were sitting there, they would play and they would pray the psalms and worship the Lord. And now they're thinking back of those days. And often when we're in the throes of sin, right, when we're living apart from the Lord, it's very interesting. Even though people may be hostile to the faith, or they're angry at the church for some reason, or they're angry at God for some reason, and they're away, they're not practicing their faith, almost like they're trying to get revenge on God. I'll show you, I'm going to stop living and practicing my faith. There's still a part of them, like the Israelites here in Babylon. They're away, but there's a sense of sadness, there's a sense of longing, and sometimes people, when they're angry, when they don't understand, they suppress that, right? They allow the thinking and the ways of the world, the Babylon, to draw them in, but yet there's still a part of them where that maybe it's just an ember that needs to be stirred into flame, that little sign of hope, that little ember of hope that still burning at least a little bit in their hearts, that are longing for the beauty and the fullness of truth, but is being overwhelmed by all the ashes that are being piled on top of it, the ashes of Babylon, the ashes of the contemporary culture. All right. And so the psalm continues. For it was there that they asked us, our captors, for songs, our oppressors for joy. Sing to us, they said, one of Zion's songs. Right? So it's like, it's almost like, no, not like they're mocking them, but they'll say, come on, just sing us one of, let us hear what your song sounded like before. Almost like they're trying to trigger a memory, right? We talk about this all the time with music, how music triggers a memory, right? So that they, and the Israelites are. I mean, think about this for a second. You're in a place where you're not close to God, right? You're in a place where you're away from God, and someone reminds you, hey, wait a minute, weren't you? Did you used to be Catholic? Wait a minute, didn't you used to practice your faith? Did you used to go to church? Weren't you an altar server? Didn't you used to go to mass with your parents? What happened? And you don't want to go there, right? You don't want to go, but someone see that they're reminding you, right? They're trying to trigger something in your heart, and you don't want to go there, right? You don't want to go there. You want to stay. You're very comfortable. You want to stay where you are. Well, and it's very interesting in this case. You know, I, and you'll see in a second, the Israelites are reluctant to do that, but in a sense, why not? Why not sing? I mean, yes, I see they have a hard time singing and praising the Lord when they're in the midst of suffering, or in the midst of turmoil, or in the midst of exile. But this is also an opportunity to show forth the power of God to these people who are asking for an opportunity to have the door open and let that light shine through. Again, in this case, as we'll see in the next couple of verses, they were reluctant to do that. But for us, what an opportunity that this person has given us to reawaken, to stir again, and to stir in the flame that little ember of hope. To not just to reject the teachers of the church because we don't like them, but an opportunity that even someone completely unexpected, to help lead us to the truth.
Yeah, and my wife says all the time, you can't get better on your own. And so oftentimes we'll use that on each other. She's like, don't give me wisdoms back on me, because she knows that it's coming from a place of faith, that we have to press into God. And I will say, going back to your reference on music, there are times that God has used music to get through my pain or my stubbornness or whatever, because patients or doctors make the worst patients, right? So when we're the orchestrator of our situation, we know what we've done. We don't want to hear what God has to say, but once we get to the rock bottom, then we have nowhere to look but up. So oftentimes God lets us get to rock bottom so that we have nowhere to look but to Him.
Yeah, oh, exactly right. Exactly right. And and like I said, the Israelites were reluctant to do that, as we'll hear now, right? The last couple of verses
Yeah.
that we'll look at for today. Oh, how could we sing the song of the Lord on foreign soil? They can't even imagine. How you want us to sing, like almost entertain you with our worship songs? But remember, the Lord said for them to get comfortable, to have children, to plant their vines, to plant their crops, because you're going to be here for a while, right? Remember, when they first went to exile, that's what the Lord said to them: get comfortable. You're going to be here for a while before I finally draw you out back into your own land. But again, there's this little reluctance here, right? This little pushback. How can we sing the song? You want us to entertain you? This is not entertainment. This is our worship. And their hearts are so withdrawn that they can't imagine playing songs of worship in this land of exile. Again, sometimes in the darkness of our hearts, in the darkness of our sin, when we're living in a way that's apart from God, we have that same experience. And then they say in verse 5, if I forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Right. So remember, nothing against left-handed people, right? But your right hand is your oath-swearing hand. This is the hand that you held your weapon in. This is the right side. The right hand is where the person that shared power with you, that's where they sat. They sat at your right. That's why Jesus said we sit at the right hand of the Father. right? So they can't even imagine. But we can. We can imagine what it's like to open our hearts deeply to God.
For more on the Soulful Psalms with Deacon Harold Sivers, check out Beacon of Truth weekdays at 4 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio and streaming everywhere you listen to podcasts.